In this video, I'll show you everything you need to know about preparing a body for paint, covering each step from start to finish with detailed explanations. To begin, I'll provide a brief overview of how mold lines appear on a body kit and walk you through the steps to eliminate them. Mold lines on plastic bodies appear during manufacturing due to the nature of the injection molding process. Here's a breakdown of why they form. Two-part molds. Plastic bodies are made using two-part molds, typically made from metal, with cavities shaped like the final product. When the mold closes, it creates a small seam where the two halves meet. Injection of molten plastic. Molten plastic is injected into the mold under high pressure to fill the cavity. The plastic cools and solidifies, taking the shape of the mold. Seam line. The point where the two halves of the mold meet is called the parting line, which is where mold lines appear on the plastic part. Any misalignment or gap between the mold halves, or wear over time, can cause a thin ridge of excess plastic to form along this parting line. Ejecting the part. Once the plastic part has cooled, the mold opens and the part is ejected. The parting line, now visible as a mold line, is left on the surface of the part. Why they persist. Mold lines are usually small and can be smoothed out, but because they occur at the natural seam where the mold splits, they're difficult to avoid entirely. Manufacturers try to minimize them, but their visibility can vary based on the complexity of the part, the material used, or the condition of the mold. In scale modeling, mold lines are often cleaned up by sanding or scraping the surface to smooth out these imperfections before painting. This particular body doesn't have any visible mold lines, or at least I haven't noticed them yet. In this case, I'll use a different body from another kit that clearly shows mold lines. Here's an example from the Tamiya Ferrari F40 kit. Join our community of model building enthusiasts by hitting that subscribe button and never miss out on our latest videos. This is the mold line I'm talking about. You can even feel it by running your fingernail over it, and I'll show a picture to make that line more visible. On a real car, you'd never see mold lines. The surface is meant to be smooth and even. Our goal is to remove these lines completely. If left untouched, they'll become very noticeable after all the painting processes. The most effective way to deal with this is by using a permanent marker to highlight the mold line. Then we'll need a sanding stick to remove it. The type of sanding tool depends on the curve of the surface. For example, with the Ferrari F40 body, you can use any standard sanding stick or sandpaper, since the surface is relatively straight. I'd recommend starting with 400 grit for the best results. Once the permanent marker highlight is gone, that means the mold line has been mostly removed as well. As another example, if you were to find a mold line on the Mini Cooper body in a similar location, you'd encounter a curved surface. In this case, I would need a different sanding tool like a sponge, which can conform to the curve. Using a firm sanding tool here could remove too much material and flatten the curve instead of preserving its shape. While there isn't a mold line on this particular surface, I want to demonstrate the technique. The Mini Cooper has a half-round surface, and I prefer to use a sanding stick with 400 grit for this type of work. This sponge-like sanding tool conforms to the shape, allowing for more controlled material removal. For flat surfaces, a firmer sanding tool works well. But I find that Tamiya's sponge with 400 grit is also effective. I prefer the sponge tool because it provides a great grip and handle, enabling me to use less energy while achieving excellent results. Another way to make the process easier and faster is by using power tools. For example, I have attached a Tamiya sponge to double-sided tape. This method allows for quick and efficient smoothing. As you can see, it takes almost no time to achieve a completely smooth surface. After this, I'll do a slight sanding with 600 grit sandpaper to remove any scratches left from the 400 grit. Here's the result I was aiming for, especially when comparing it to the untouched side. Remember, if the mold line is not removed, it will be very noticeable on the fully painted body. No primer, paint, or clear coat will hide that line. In fact, it will be highlighted even more, creating an eyesore every time you look at your finished product. The next step is working on the panel lines. On this plastic body, like many others, the panel lines are too shallow and narrow, so they need to be deepened and widened slightly. Otherwise, after applying several coats of primer and paint, the panel lines might disappear. Here's an example of how the panel lines look on this plastic body. It's a small detail, but if skipped and left unaccented, the model can end up looking more like a toy rather than a real car. The goal is to make the model look as realistic as possible. If you take a look at a real car, you'll notice the rubber seals, also known as weather stripping, around the doors, trunk, and other joints. These seals serve important purposes like waterproofing, noise reduction, keeping out dirt and dust, temperature regulation, vibration dampening, and ensuring the car's structural integrity. These seals create dark lines between the joints, and by using panel line accent colors on the model, we can replicate that realistic look. Panel line scribing tools overview. Here are all the scribing tools I have, though I primarily use just 2 of them. I'm showing the full collection to give you an idea of the different options available, but this is by no means an exhaustive list of what's on the market. If you don't have any specialized scribing tools, you can still use the back of a hobby knife. I personally used that method when I first got into the hobby in 2016. Is it doable? Yes. Is it the best way to scribe panel lines? Not really. While it can get the job done, it's easy to slip off the line and create unwanted scratches that you'll need to fix later with filler. This tool here is my first proper scriber. It has a hook-like shape with a sharp 0.2mm edge. It's a big step up from using a knife, but if the panel line is too shallow, it's still easy to slip and create those annoying scratches. The key with this tool is to work slowly, scribing little by little with almost no pressure. The next tool, which has become my favorite, is actually a combination of 2 tools. The first one, with the red handle, has a 0.125mm blade. I ordered it from a Japanese store, and while it was pretty expensive for a scriber, it has proven to be worth it. Unfortunately, I can't recall the brand, but I could look it up from my order history. This tool is perfect for shallow panel lines. With just a little pressure, it holds the track well and removes a good amount of material. Once the track is slightly deeper, the tool starts to glide smoothly, making it easier to remove more material quickly. After the panel lines are deep enough, I switch to my next tool, which I bought from Facebook a while ago. This one has a 0.2mm blade, and I use it to make the panel lines a bit wider. It has a comfortable handle and offers a great grip, making it almost impossible to slip from the track, especially after using the previous scriber. This combination of tools works really well together. Additionally, this tool is great for creating guidelines, which I'll demonstrate later during the masking techniques. These lines need to be a bit deeper to help the knife cut through the masking tape cleanly. The next 2 scribers are by Tamiya and they're color-coded for blade size. The yellow one has a 0.3mm blade, while the green one has a 0.2mm blade. I used to have the blue one with a 0.1mm blade, but I managed to break that hook somehow. Either the metal was too fragile or the quality wasn't great. These Tamiya scribers are a bit more affordable than the previous ones I showed, but they're still on the pricey side. The set is designed to have one handle with interchangeable blades. I haven't needed to replace them yet, so this set is sitting in my spare stock for now, waiting for a future project. Next up is my set of scribers from HIQ Parts, a Japanese brand. These tools are incredibly precise. They come in various sizes, 0.44, 0.25mm, 0.5mm, 0.8mm. One side can be used for plastic scribing, while the opposite side can be used for part cleanup. These are perfect for creating guidelines with high precision. The next tool is by the US company Funtech, or at least the handle is made in the US while the blades are produced in Japan. I have 3 available blade sizes, 0.1mm, 0.15mm, and 0.3mm. These tools seem promising and are of good quality, but unfortunately I had the same issue with the 0.1mm blade as I did with Tamiya. It broke off in a similar manner. However, I was able to replace the broken 0.1mm blade. The handle typically comes with a 0.1mm blade as an option, or you can purchase them separately. You only need one handle and can swap out the blades as needed. The handle has an excellent grip, making it very comfortable to use. Even though I have a 0.3mm blade, I rarely use that size. It might be more useful for larger scales like 120 or 116. The next tool is another handle, but this one comes with 5 chisels or knives of different sizes in a single package. 0.2mm, 0.4mm, 0.6mm, 0.8mm, and 1mm. The 0.2mm size should be useful in my case, though I'm not quite sure where I'll use the larger sizes. Replacing the blades isn't as convenient as with the previous scribers I've shown, as it requires an Allen key to screw and unscrew the blade to hold it in place. However, the handle has a nice grip, and the blades seem to be of good quality. They don't seem like they'll break easily. Overall, it's still a good option to have, just in case. The next set of scribers is from the brand Infini model. I have 3, though I was only able to find 2 at the moment. One is 0.05mm and the other is 0.075mm. The third one is quite specific and designed for correcting wavy lines. While my panel lines on plastic bodies are generally straight, this tool is particularly useful for resin bodies. Previously, I used sandpaper to fix imperfections, but this tool makes the process much easier and more precise. It's made from high-quality metal that doesn't seem prone to breaking, and it's great for fixing and sharpening lines. These scribers should be used in combination. Start with a regular scriber to establish the line, then use the correcting tool to straighten and clean it up. Additionally, I have a couple of even better tools for straightening lines and making the edges more precise. These are from Menashima brand, and they've been a great find. Take a look at the reference picture in the right corner to see how the tool is used to correct a panel line. Some of my earlier models had issues where panel lines were uneven, and this only became obvious when filling them with panel liner paint. I initially tried fixing them with sandpaper, but that was a slow and frustrating process. That's why I'm always looking to try new tools that make these tasks easier. For detailing the gas filling door, I use a pointed tool, and I have a few options available for this purpose. The scrapers I previously showed aren't quite suited for this task. Instead, I use a pointed tool to carefully go around the door line, deepening it gradually. One of my favorites for this job is a tungsten carbide scriber, which I found on Amazon. This tool is excellent for rescribing delicate details like the gas filling door. It's also useful on some resin models where manufacturers sometimes omit the gas doors. With this tool, I can scribe them from scratch if needed, though that's a story for another time. Another tool I use, which I reviewed earlier, comes with an interchangeable pointed tool attachment. I simply swap out the scribing blade for a pointed tool on the same handle. These are often referred to as rivet scribers. Lastly, I use a pointed tool by Hasegawa. It's effective and affordable, with a comfortable, rubberized handle. This tool is also one of the thinnest I have, at around 0.11 millimeters, making it ideal for precise detailing work. My techniques for scribing panel lines. When scribing panel lines, I hold the tool like a pen or pencil, keeping one finger on the surface for stability. This helps reduce the chances of slipping and accidentally scratching the model. I apply almost no pressure, moving slowly to remove a small amount of material with each pass. The goal here is to deepen the panel line gradually. I start by scribing from top to bottom, then flip the model and work from the opposite direction. Typically, about 7 passes are enough to achieve the desired depth. Once the panel line is deep enough, I use a 0.2 millimeter scriber to widen it slightly. Since the initial line is already in place, this step is easier and more precise, with about 5 passes and light pressure being sufficient. Again, I keep one finger on the surface for control, working from bottom to top and reversing the direction for evenness. After completing the line, you can see the difference in depth and width between the scribed line and an untouched one in the comparison photo. I'll repeat this same process for all the remaining panel lines. Now, let's take a look at the finished car picture. The wheel arches, running boards, and lower sections of the front and rear bumpers should all be flat black. There are a few methods to achieve this look, and none are set in stone. You can choose whichever method best suits your preferences. It's Method 1. This first method is the safest and can be applied after the body is painted white, either before or after the clear coat. Use 1 to 2 mm tape, or trim a straight line from any available tape. A narrow tape is easier to apply around curves. There's also specific vinyl tape for curves, which works well for some modelers, though I found it doesn't stick well for me. With this tape, carefully follow the lines little by little until you reach the desired result. The goal is to mask the areas that need to stay white, leaving the surfaces you want to paint black exposed. This method is excellent if you're less experienced with a hobby knife, as you can apply it at any stage without risking the paint job. However, it's also the most time-consuming, with more chances for small mistakes. If the tape isn't placed precisely, you may end up with lines that aren't as straight or clean as you'd like. Method 2. This method is a bit more efficient, in my opinion. You can create a template before painting the body. This approach not only saves time, but also helps you build up your knife skills. Start by applying 18 mm tape to the middle of the trim line. Use a bamboo stick, like mine with a pointed tip I carved myself, a toothpick or your fingernail to press the tape firmly along the trim line. Then, use a hobby knife to cut along the guide. I'm showing a single trim section here, but this would need to be done around the entire trim. After cutting, label the tape, e.g. front left, so you can reapply it at any paint stage, either before or after clear coating. The upside to this method is that it's faster than the first, while still allowing for careful application. It's also a great way to improve knife skills for more advanced techniques. However, this method still carries some chance for minor errors, like lines that aren't as straight as desired, or potential paint bleed if the line isn't deep enough. I'm showing a single trim section here, but this would need to be done around the entire trim. Method 3. The third and my favorite method is a bit more advanced. It's similar to the second method, but here I skip templates and cut the tape directly on the painted surface, either before or after the clear coat. Since the panel lines are shallow on this model, I'll deepen them slightly to ensure they remain visible through the layers of paint and to serve as a solid guide for the knife. For this, I use my go-to 0.1 mm scriber to deepen the lines. I don't need a wider tool since these lines are just a guide for the blade, and deeper grooves help secure the masking tape and minimize paint bleed. A few slow, light passes with the scriber will be enough here. No need to overdo it. Repeat this process for all lines shown in the picture, including those on the bumpers. For more complex curves on the bumpers, I use a combination of the scraper and a pointed tool to follow the curves precisely. Here's an example of how to scribe rounded lines. The next step in preparing the model is to sand the entire surface using a 600 grit sanding sponge or sandpaper. This step is crucial because the plastic body has a naturally glossy finish, but for primer and paint to adhere properly, the surface needs to be slightly roughened. Without this rough texture, the bond between the plastic body and primer might be weak, and there's a risk that, when removing masking tape later, the paint could lift or peel away from the surface. This is particularly true in our case, as we'll need to mask different areas throughout the painting process. To achieve this scuffed texture, I prefer using a 600 grit Tamiya sanding sponge. Using a sponge instead of just sandpaper is beneficial, as the sponge can conform to the shape of the surface, especially around curves and contours, ensuring an even, controlled sanding process. I typically cut a small piece of the sponge for easy handling, and I keep a second piece nearby to switch out if the first becomes dull or loses effectiveness. Once the sanding is complete, you can simply discard these pieces. However, note that I'll be using a zero paint filler primer, which is thicker and will cover any minor scratches left by the 600 grit sanding. In my upcoming video, I'll cover all aspects of paint and primer. If you're using a different primer, one that isn't a filler primer or has a thinner viscosity, you may want to do an additional pass with a higher grit, such as 1500, to ensure no scratches show through once the primer is applied. You could start with 600 grit to establish the initial texture and finish with 1500 grit if needed. When sanding the body, be cautious about how you hold it. Some areas of the body may have weak points, and if you apply too much pressure or grip it improperly, you risk breaking those connections, leading to unnecessary repair work. Focus on holding the model in areas with more solid structure to ensure you have a firm grip. Avoid pressing down on fragile areas, and let the sponge do the work with minimal pressure. As you begin sanding, work across the surface in steady, long strokes, or even in circular motions if that feels more natural. The key is to ensure the surface becomes uniformly matte. Continue until the entire body loses its glossy finish. This matte texture is ideal for achieving a strong bond with the primer. Here's an example of why I prefer a sanding sponge. When working over curved surfaces, the sponge adapts to the shape, allowing you to remove the correct amount of material without altering or flattening the curve. This flexibility ensures the contours remain intact. The surface should now be entirely matte with all gloss removed, which is precisely the condition we want to achieve before applying the primer. Be mindful of raised details on the model, such as the two small windshield sprayers, as these can be unintentionally sanded away during the process. If you don't plan to remove and replace these details, carefully work around them. In my case, I'll be removing these sprayers to replace them with new ones later in the process, after the clear coat. This step will be covered in a future video, but for now, if you're interested, you can refer to my full build for this model to see why it's sometimes better to replace delicate details like these at the final stages.
Preparation.
Continue this sanding process around the entire body. Once you've achieved a uniform matte finish, give the model a gentle wash with warm water using a toothbrush to remove any dust from panel lines and surface areas. Allow the model to dry thoroughly, and it will then be ready for the primer application. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for my next video. I'll dive into the details of paint preparation, primer options, paint types, and the tools needed, including airbrushes and paint cans. We'll cover everything you need to know to bring your model to life with a stunning finish. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps inspire me to create more content for you to enjoy.